Hi, welcome to Silk Relays, your destination for all things wigs, toppers, and hair. My name's Chelsea, and I was diagnosed with androgenic alopecia at age 26. Yep, I started going bald in my 20s. Something that was really difficult for me when I got my androgenic alopecia diagnosis was I just had no clue why me? What did I do wrong? What caused this? So something that I've learned over the years is that there seems to be some type of vague blended cocktail of environmental factors, hormones, and genetics that are involved in hair. The reality is, hair is actually really complicated for something that we don't pay that much attention to. In my own family, hair loss in men, this little bit of it that there is pretty obvious, right? It's like my brother, he has a little bit of a widow's peak. My uncle, he has a little bit of a widow's peak. My grandpa, he had one too. Boom, boom, boom. It's all the same pattern of hair loss right here at the hairline, which is typical for men. And it's very obvious where that came from. I was really curious about our own family history and whether or not my mom thought that any of the women in our family had ever had hair loss like me. I'd always thought that I was kind of alone and isolated within our family tree in my experience of hair loss.
I mean, it's obviously kind of the hard part about these things is, we'll never know. And I'm sure even if grandma were still around, she probably would not have wanted to talk to me about this. I remember grandma wearing her hair very much always in, a bob. So like kind of, shoulder length or a bit shorter. I remember it, being, pretty gray. And I remember it always being kind of worn back from her face. So like almost like not slicked back, but like very much like brushed back away from her face. Like I don't even remember her having like a parting,
I don't ever remember her having a parting in her hair, even when her hair wasn't gray yet, or very too much gray at all, yet. She never had a parting in her hair. That could have just been the style that she went with. I mean,
it's, it's interesting because obviously, like I mentioned, with my hair, I think that, because I knew my parting and my crown were, kind of issues that I was becoming very insecure about. Even though I've always prided myself on being a pretty confident person, I was definitely, becoming very insecure about my hair. And that style made me feel safe because people couldn't see it.
She never really loved her hair. She would say, I don't know, it was just more like watching her combing it, and she would touch it occasionally. It was more of like a feeling I got from her. She didn't discuss this stuff at all. I mean, she really didn't. And so, it was really just a feeling.
When I did start losing my hair, that's a part of, what felt so isolating about it was it didn't just feel like I was losing my hair. It felt like I was really losing a part of my identity, and it felt like I really had to reimagine a lot of things kind of on my own, because nobody else understood that.
That strikes a chord to me, similar to grandma. She kind of had to she had to do it all on her own because she certainly wasn't going to open up to anyone about her look. I mean, her look is what I'm talking about. Not about losing.
No, I mean, her look was not up for discussion. Like she was going to be who she was going to be.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that about her.
Me
and I
too.
think that, you have, I don't know, would you say I think you've kind of gotten that a little bit from her, I'd
like to think so. I think,
you love clothes and you're very much yourself. You've always been very much yourself.
For me, as a woman, I'm the only one in my family, as far as I know, who has androgenic alopecia and who had hair loss. That said, it doesn't mean that my androgenic alopecia couldn't have been contributed to by my genetics. So I decided to talk to a specialist about my condition and learn a little bit more about its connection to whether or not it's hereditary and whether or not someone in my family could have feasibly given it to me.
My name is Kumar Sukhdeo. I'm a board-certified dermatologist. I trained at NYU, and in particular, my subspecialty is in hair restoration, including complex scalp and hair disorders. So the first thing I'll just define is the word alopecia, which oftentimes is, I think, used a little bit incorrectly. Medically speaking, alopecia is just our word for any kind of hair loss in any part of the body. Most often, people use it in layman's terms as what you are referring to as pattern hair loss. But when you say alopecia, it's always good to specify what kind of alopecia. So androgenic alopecia, that's a specific form of alopecia that refers to the hormonal or genetic cause of pattern hair loss.
For me, I think a part of that process, there's a couple of things, but one of the things was I went off birth control. And I had a really huge bout of telogen effluvium. Did I say that right?
Yeah, perfect.
So I had a big bout of that. And that was when I started to realize, and it just kind of kept going. And my hair, and they kept saying, oh, it's going to grow back. It's going to grow back. And then it never grew back. So I was like, oh, I think something's wrong. There's something else going on, which is when I did eventually then go to a doctor. So I know that there's a lot of environmental factors, and I imagine maybe even the hormones can play into that, right? Considering you're saying it's a hormonal process, you know, I've sometimes wondered if that contributed to it.
Not to nerd out too much, but you know, the hair is, you can think of it as a very delicate machine that's operating on a 7-year cycle, 7 to 9 years or so. Every 7 to 9 years, it falls out and starts all over again. And in between that, it's sort of humming along. But if you have issues with hormones from either like birth control or even IVF or some other, maybe a small hormone producing tumor, and thyroid problems or other things that can stress your body, it can throw off this machine that's normally humming along, and it can take a while for it to reset itself.
That I feel like there's this like very old notion, and I don't know where it's come from, that like balding comes from a particular like side, like the maternal side of your family. So I'm just curious, like, what is the actual connection between androgenic alopecia or androgenetic alopecia, as you said, and how it's inherited? Are you more likely to have it if you have a family member who's had it? Is that the only way you're likely to have it? I'm just curious to know your thoughts on this.
That's been the holy grail for a long time. If we could figure out, you know, what are the genes that are involved in hair loss, could we identify them? Could we perhaps predict what might happen in someone? And so far, we haven't yet nailed it down exactly. We do know that it can be inherited, but we would say it's something called polygenic, which is that there are multiple genes that are involved in whether someone's going to lose their hair or not through pattern hair loss. And what those genes are, we have a general sense. One of them is the androgen receptor, how sensitive it is to different hormones. But I think that the old wives' tale, I think you're alluding to, like whether it's it runs in your mom's side, you can predict that actually, when they've done large scale studies, hasn't really proven to be the case. It's a mixture, and you can even have someone where everyone in the family has thick hair, but they may just be the one person to experience pattern hair loss, and even sometimes early, and vice versa, where everyone else can have it, but you might be the one to not have it. So it's not a perfect correlation. In my practice, for instance, I do like asking about family history because it's another clue that we can use to help inform about the diagnosis. So if it tends to run in your family, then it's a higher likelihood that it might happen to you, and vice versa.
So I'm curious to know, like, what role does gender play in that? So, for example, would I be more likely to if this is, something that played into my genetics, would I be more likely to have inherited it from like a woman in my family versus a man, or does it just not matter?
To my knowledge, it doesn't seem like it matters very much. The genes that are involved in this are not carried on the sex chromosome. So your X or your Y, those don't seem to matter too much for whether you're going to have this or not.
It's interesting. So a part of what inspired me to start looking into this is because nobody else in my family really has hair loss, at least not to the extent that I've had, where they lost it when they were very young.
I think even with our grandmother or great-grandmother generation, we don't necessarily know what happened because a lot of times they just hid it so well and nobody knew what actually happened. So it's hard to know exactly with family members what was happening.
Ultimately, I'll never know, unfortunately, whether or not my grandmother shared this exact same thing as me. In a way, I kind of can't help but daydream about a reality in which me and my grandma would go for cocktails and go wig shopping and just hang out and be able to have someone in my family to relate to about this topic. Ultimately, something that's always had me afraid is whether or not I would pass this on to somebody else. But the reality is that in genetics, it's just kind of random. It doesn't mean if you have something that the next person's going to. And not only that, but the things that we pass on to our loved ones are always so much more important and nuanced than just the medical things that we might have. I'll never know exactly what caused my hair loss until there's a little bit more science and research behind it. So what do you guys think? Do you have androgenic alopecia, and do your family members have it? Let us know in the comments below. And otherwise, I hope you guys have a great hair day.